There's a couple of things going to be slightly different about the webinar that I'm doing tonight for anyone who's been to one of these before. Excuse me. In that I have, for a start, I have the main camera in a different position, and the reason that I've done that is so that I can show you something of the setup. Usually you manage to see just me talking, and then you get a close-up of what I'm painting, and it will be a bit like that this time. But I'm going to try and zoom out and show you a little bit more about how I have things set up, because there's a very specific problem that I'm covering in the webinar today, and that's how to paint white objects and have them look real. It's certainly a very tricky problem, or it can be a tricky problem, but I don't think it needs to be if you do a bit of preparation first. I know that it's something that quite a lot of people struggle with, because quite a few people have emailed me and told me as much and said they'd like to see a webinar on this particular subject. So here we are. I'm going to paint you a quick demonstration as I usually do. I'm going to demonstrate for you a way to get around this problem of painting white objects. And the difficulty basically with painting white objects is it's a value problem. So if you are trying to paint something like this, say, this mug, perhaps it's not an especially charming subject for a painting, but the problem with this is that you're going right to the highest values that you can reach in paint with white, and that's what makes it so difficult. But if you spend a little bit of time balancing the light on your painting surface with your subject before you start, I think you'll be fine. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you. I've painted this little jug, this little cold port jug that I got from an antiques fair. I've painted this many times, and it's pretty typical of the kind of problems that you can have. And what's interesting about painting this kind of thing is that not only is it a very light value, the local value of this, ignoring the blue print, is I think it's painted actually, not printed, but ignoring the pattern, the local value is very light, but it's also shiny, which means that you have direct reflected light, which is definitely outside the range of paint. It's effectively a little light source, the reflected light's bouncing off it. So when you come to do something like that in a painting, it gives you some difficulties, because you're trying to paint something which is outside the range of paint. So I'm going to show you really two things today. The first one is about preparation, about getting your setup right, so that you give yourself the best chance of getting the value balance right between light and shadow, which is basically what makes something look real or not if you don't get it right, and also how to deal with those little reflected lights. And it can be done. You can fool the eye. This is a painting that I did. I don't know how well you can see that. I finished this one just yesterday actually. I've just put this one up for auction on the site, and it's of this little jug, obviously, as you can see. And you can actually get pretty close to what you see. Now, what I've done here is I haven't painted exactly what I saw, but I've done some preparation work to get as close as I could. Anon says, nice painting, thank you. If you can sign in with your name in the chat, that's really handy, because it means that I can actually talk to you as a person rather than just Anon. But thank you anyway, it's a very nice thing to say. So some of you may have seen that I put a video up on Facebook and on my blog recently about balancing the light. And in that video, I shot that video in daylight, which is how I normally paint. Now, these webinars for me, because most of the people watching this will be all over the world, but a fair proportion in the US, what I tend to do is I do these quite late at night. So for me, this is about 9 o'clock at night. So it's starting to get dark outside. So obviously I'm under artificial light, and right through the winter I was painting under artificial light. So I've got the setup in a particular way to allow me, not only so that you can see me on the camera, but to allow me to paint these kind of demonstrations. So what I'm going to do is, I think probably what I'll start with is to show you the entire setup first, so that you know the context that we're working within, and then I'm going to go into showing you how you can set up basically balancing the light across your painting surface and the subject, which is just behind here in a shadow box. I know you can't see it on this camera shot, but you'll see it shortly, just a little white pot. how you can go about balancing the light between the two to give you the best chance of getting around that value problem. So I'm going to have to... Now what I'm hoping is the mic sometimes goes funny when I move around. Hopefully that's not going to happen today. But let me zoom this camera out so you can see a little bit more. Now hopefully this makes it... I'm going to have to pan the camera around a little. You can see I've got one large... just let me... Sorry, I've just got to change something on the laptop. There we go. Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to check the mic was still working. So I've got one large light in a softbox, which is kind of back here, you can see. And that's shining into the shadow box, which is slightly obscured by the drawing board. But hopefully you can see that is my main subject light. But I've also got over here, if I can get out of the way, you can't see it so well actually, but this big black shape that I've got here is actually a second light. Let me try and move the camera a little so you can see. I've got another light which is the same, another big soft box back here. Now these soft boxes, each of them holds 4 bulbs, and I use quite strong bulbs, so I've only got one bulb in the softbox, which is kind of shining onto this surface over here, and I've got 2 bulbs on in this one, so this light is a little bit stronger than this one. So hopefully you can see just from that how I've got my basic setup is. My subject is in a shadow box back here. I've got a painting surface on a drawing board here, and the drawing board, just let me put this lead down. The drawing board is actually important because it screens off a lot of the light which is coming from this secondary light I've got here and going on to. It's stopping it from going past my painting surface and into the shadow box because it's all about controlling the light. And that's why you need something like a big drawing board here to soak up the light from this secondary light, which is mostly shining on here, to make sure it doesn't go into the softbox there. And I'm going to switch the cameras now, and to show you, hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate for you exactly what the value problem is that we struggle with. Some of this is going to be a little bit kind of chaotic, I'm afraid, because I've got so much switching around of cameras and stuff to do today, but bear with me because it's not going to be very slick, this one, but hopefully I've decided to go for trying to give you the best information I can and to make it as clear as I can, which may mean a couple of odd things happening as we go along, like dropping the mic or something like that, but bear with me as I switch from one to the other. So you can see here I've got in my subject, for my subject in my shadow box, I've got this this little white pot, okay? And it's also got, it's also a shiny pot. Sorry, I'm just fiddling with the mic a bit. It's also a shiny pot, so it has these little highlights on it as well, which I want to catch if I want to make this look real, but they're well outside the range of paint. And what I've got here is, you can make these really easily. This is just a simple piece of MDF with 3 values painted on it. This is ivory black, although I painted this a long time ago, probably 10 years or more, so this is actually slightly lighter than ivory black now. Over here I've got titanium white, and in the middle this is a mid-value neutral. Now you can paint, all you really need is 3 values. You need your darkest that you can get there, your lightest that you can get there, and mix something that's visually in the middle. Now these, obviously, as you know, I use Monsell. Now this is the Monsell value page from the big book, and what you have here is these are the main values. You can see I'm actually missing value 9, but it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, that would be 9. And then these all go in quarters. So that's 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1.75, 2. There's a few missing. You know, I have young children, they like to play with these things, and also I've lost a few over the years. And over here we've got a couple of extra ones. This here is the darkest you can get in paint, and that's a 0.5, which roughly corresponds to ivory black. Here This is 9.5, this one here. That's pretty much the lightest you can get in paint, and that roughly corresponds to titanium white. You can sometimes get slightly lighter with some titanium whites, but that's about as light as you can get. So if I go back to my little checker, you can see, hopefully, I don't know how clear that is, but my black is slightly lighter than the 0.5 here. And my white is not, it's pretty close, but not quite as light perhaps as the titanium white, as the 9.5 here. But this pretty much represents the range that you can hit in paint from dark to light. So that means if I hold this on my painting surface, that's the range that I can hit from there to there. So if I move this over parallel to my painting surface, over in front of my subject, I can see that I'm almost there on the light plane. Pretty much I can hit the light plane, right, of this little pot. What I can't do within the range of paint there is hit the very lightest parts, because they're much too light. But this also shows me, because this is a mid-value grey, let me show you again what I mean by that. It's this value here, which is value 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perceptually roughly the middle of the value range. Okay, it's a neutral 5 that I've got in the middle there. But like I say, as long as you have this somewhere near the middle, it will work for you. You don't have to use Munsell to do this. You can see also that the shadow side here of this little pot is substantially darker than my middle value. Now at the moment, I have a fairly narrow range of values in the subject, but let's say if I change this a little, and let's say I had a black background, or at least a very dark grey background, and it changes things a little there. Now I've got a much wider value range in my subject, and there may be areas of it that I'm going to struggle hitting. You can see that the darkest value that I've got on my little swatch is not quite as dark as the very darkest one that I've got in the background. Over here it gets slightly darker, because it's a cast shadow. And there's a cast shadow also behind the pot there. And that's getting down to about almost as the lowest value that I can get. Certainly very close. But the reason that I've managed to get to the point, I'm going to put the normal background back on now that I'm going to use for the actual little study. That was just to show you what a full range of values that you're trying to hit can look like. Of course, this would be complicated even further if I had a black object next to this, a black local that had, I can simulate it with this, that had one face facing away from the light in shadow, then it would be darker still. And I would really struggle to hit that value, you know. Let me show you what would normally happen now. I've already got this set up, so I've got extra light on my painting surface here. So I'm going to turn that extra light off now. Okay, so I'm just going to be having the one light set up, and let's see what happens to the value range on my painting surface. Suddenly it's much darker. You can immediately see the difference in the lightest light that I can get here against the subject. And my white now is considerably darker. So if I say I visually match this value here of the shadow side, and then I paint the lightest light that I can get here, which is white, because I don't have enough light on my painting surface here, the relationship is going to be wrong. So the value on the ground here in front of this little pot is about a middle value, about a value 5. You can see the correlation between them there. This value is slightly lower, so if I paint that value of the background right and then try and paint a white, I'm going to get the relationships out, and it's not going to work. So that's why I've put that extra light on. And there are two things that I can do. I'm going to switch back to the other camera for a second now. Okay, can you just tell me again if you're having any If you're having any problem in that with the sound or with the video, it looks like it's working all right to me, but it's obviously it's kind of difficult for me to check often. So we're back on the other camera now, which is showing you the setup. And I'll show you the other thing that I can do if I want to. Say that this was a window light, which is normally, this is where the window is in my studio, so it would normally be over this side. The other thing that I could do to change the value that I perceive here is to angle this towards the light like that, and that will allow more light to fall on here and it will raise the value there. Okay, I just wanted to show you what I was doing. I'm going to switch back to the other camera now and show you what that looks like when you're looking at the painting surface. So if I angle it towards the light, suddenly it starts to get lighter. It's still not as light as the lightest plane, but it's how I can change the value of my painting surface here to make it easier for me to hit the lights. But if you're painting by artificial light and you've got a setup like I have here, it's much easier to sort out, because all you need to do, and I'll do it now again, is to switch on this secondary light that shines on the painting surface, and suddenly now I know that I can pretty much match the value range. Okay, so in a nutshell, that shows you what the problem is, and it gives you a way to fix it, at least if you're working as I am at the moment under artificial lights. Okay, most people are saying the sound and video is okay, so I'm gonna keep going. So now, since I've got this camera on now and set up on the subject, I think I'm going to start doing a little bit of painting. And I don't know how far I'm going to get through this little demo this time, but what I want to show you is how, using one-to-one comparisons, I can pretty much nail the value relationships now, except for this one problem that I have left. Okay, the one problem that I have left is that I can't quite get to the very lightest parts, like this bit here where there's reflected light, and I'll show you how I managed to do that. I'll tell you quickly and then I'll show you as I'm painting it. In this painting, the way that I did it is the way that I always do it, is that I paint the lightest lights on the jug, the lightest form, parts of the form. I drop the value very slightly, which gives me a little bit of headroom to paint pure titanium white for the little highlights. And in practice, it works okay. As long as you don't drop those values too much, it works okay. And I'm going to do it with this one as well. So, as I usually do with these, I'm going to start off by painting the background. Now, I've already checked and mixed up pretty close colours for the background here. So I'm going to paint that in first. You can see I've laid out the drawing pretty quickly, because you know this little pot has got ellipses in it and all sorts, and it's geometrically perfect and everything, so it's a tricky subject to draw out, for me anyway. It might not be for you. So I'm just going to pop the background in. And one thing you always find on the, it's funny, I always think what I should do when I do these webinars is I should tone the surface first, because when you put these background colours on, they always look extremely dark when they first go on, because I'm painting them against a white surface. And you can save yourself an awful lot of heartache just by toning your surface. And one of these days I will remember to do it, and at least it will look visually less odd as I'm actually painting. But I'm pretty sure that this colour is, as near as damn it is to swearing, right, because I checked it earlier on. I've gone over onto the ground, so I'm going to have to wipe a bit of that off. Not painting very carefully, but we'll sort it out in a bit. as always, if you have any questions about what I've just shown you, by all means stick them in the chat, but there's always a chance that I might miss them whilst I'm busy either painting or gassing, or both at the same time. So in case I do miss them, remember them and ask me at the end. We'll have a little Q&A when I've bunged in some of the values on here, but hopefully as soon as I've got some of the values in, it should make it pretty clear what I'm talking about, and that I would be able to continue with this and bring it close to a finish and have it work. So I haven't painted very much of the background, but there's enough there for us to see how the values are going to work against it. So the next thing that I would do after this is to paint the ground. Now, if you remember, even just with my very simple swatch here, I could see that the ground directly in front of the pot is about a value 5. It's neutral and it's about a value 5. If you want to be really sure, you can use a little checker, an isolator like that, because the problem is, the reason this little thing is so useful is that our perception of values is very much affected by the surrounding values, and also by what we think a value might be. So we tend to overestimate the lightness of values. Like you would tend to overestimate this value here on the shadow plane because you know this object is white. I can tell you I know that value there is very low down the value scale. I've already shown you that it was below halfway, and it's actually right down about here. You know, you may not think so because it's a white object, but when I paint it, hopefully it'll make it obvious. So I know that that's about value 5. Okay. Now again, as you'd have seen before, if you've been on one of these webinars, I generally have a set of Munsell neutrals on my palette. That's a neutral grey, so I can pretty much just paint that in at about a value 5. Again, it looks perceptually quite dark going on, but I know it's about right because I've used my little checker to check it. Now, using a checker like that only works, a colour checker, and using this little thing here, that only works if you've taken the time to make sure that you can reach the lights before you actually start painting. And that's the bit that I was talking about, is the preparation. If you do that bit of preparation first, it takes a lot of the pain out of painting objects that are very light. Just make sure that you can hit the lights. It's more difficult when you've got an object of a white local. Because you're already right up the top of the range of paint. So you kind of, it makes the problem a little more difficult. You need to be more careful just to make sure that you can hit those values. Now I've got a cast shadow as well, which I want to reach. I can see that the values from here back to here, the value is obviously getting darker, and I've also got a cast shadow here. So I'll put this slightly darker value here. Now, certainly I could just wing that, or for me, because I've got these value chips here, I can actually check it and see. So I would estimate that one's probably about there. It's probably about a value 4. You can make your own value scale if you want. Or you can use, one like this, like the Munsell scale. That looks about right. Actually, maybe it goes a little bit darker right at the back, but it's about a 4 to a 3. I'm going to paint this in a very blocky way just to kind of get the values in. This is another one of those strange situations where I'm in an awkward position for painting because I'm trying not to get my head in the way of the camera. But, you know, we'll manage. It'll be fine. And I've got the same going on back here, lower value. I think we're probably somewhere near. So I want to get my cast shadow in now. Oh, there's a question there in the chat. What light bulbs are you using, Paul? The light must be balanced between warm and cool. Now, anyone who knows me well knows that I'm not a big fan of the terms warm and cool, except when you're talking about lights, because they do have temperature, and temperature is measured. Is it kelvins? I'm not sure what the measure is. But these lights that I have are, I think, 6,000 kelvins, yeah. You want to make sure that they're the same. If you've got two separate lights like I've got here, I've got one light on my subject here and another light on my painting surface. You need to make sure that they're the same. Otherwise, when you put down a colour here, thinking that it's looking the same as a colour you have there, it actually won't be the same, and it can throw your relationships right out. So these bulbs are, I think they're 6,000 K, which is slightly warmer, if you like, than daylight. I'm going to soften these edges at the back here a bit. So the cast shadow then. At this point, I've already got past the biggest problem that most people are going to have when they paint something like this. But I'm going to pick up my value book again. And I think I'm probably going to be about two, probably, for the cast shadow. Let's check it. What do you think? About 2? Is that about right? It's very crucial, by the way. Just let me demonstrate for you how important it is when you do this, that this chip and this checker here are held at the same angle to the light as this surface here, because it tells you what value this will look like when you put it down there. If I angle it away from the light, apart from the reflection, well, the reflection is stopping it showing, but it would get darker. If I angle it towards the light, again it's reflecting, it gets much lighter. Let me show you with this, because these are a more matte finish. Towards the light it gets lighter, away from the light. Let me put it in there, towards the light and away from the light. So you need to be sure that you hold this at the same angle to the light as your painting surface, otherwise this simply won't work. It's what people get wrong a lot of the time. You might have heard people say, yeah, all you need to do, right, is you need to get some paint on your brush and hold it up against the subject and see what the colour is. And yes, that's fine, as long as you're careful to make sure that when you put that colour down over here, it looks the same. Because if it doesn't look the same, you're going to be in real trouble. And it's a very inefficient way to do it anyway. But that's about a 2, right? So for the cast shadow, I'm just going to block it in fairly simply, about a value 2. And with cast shadows, remember that the hue of the shadow is dependent mostly on the hue of the surface it is falling onto, which in this case is neutral. So the hue of my cast shadow will also be neutral. Okay, so I think I'm fairly close there. My background value here is a little dark, so a little low. So I'm actually going to bring that up a little. You be careful not to do it too much. One of the weird things, actually, I'll let you into a secret. One of the weird things that I've got into, weird habits that I've got into doing webinars, is that when I'm painting now, because I have to be careful to keep my head out of the shot, instead of looking at what I'm painting, I look at the video. I look at the video to check values and stuff like that. Bizarre, huh? I can tell you it feels quite strange, but oddly you get used to it after a while. And I have to make myself remember sometimes to look at the actual subject and not just to look at the video. Pretty strange. A little bit light around here. And obviously I'm not painting this all that carefully, I'm just trying to get these values in. To demonstrate really that it's all about the value relationships, painting something that looks white. So the next thing I want to get in is this shadow plane here. Now, as I was saying before, I think that shadow plane is probably about a value 3. I'm going to check it. 1, 2, 3. Might be surprised to see that it's that low down the value scale. Let's check it. Yeah, I'd say that's just about bang on 3, maybe very slightly lighter than this chip I've got here. But you can see how your perception of that value changes when you isolate it. That's why these things are so incredibly useful. It gets slightly lighter towards the bottom, slightly darker towards the top, and I suspect that's because of reflected light coming up from the ground here into the shadow. So I want to bring that a little bit of that in as well. But if I get this broadly right, this value relationship right, this thing should start to look white. Of course, if it doesn't look white, then this whole method won't have worked. So let's see what comes out. Value 3. This bit here, it's almost exactly the same as the background. I love it when you see bits like that in a painting. I think it's probably slightly lighter, but what I love to do is to just paint across the edge. And there's something, just destroy the edge, you know. It'll look odd at the moment until I've got the rest of it in, but there's something about doing that I think makes paintings sing. And I have a theory that it's because it mirrors the way our perception works. Because there isn't an objective reality out there that we can say this is definitely this way. Perception is psychological as well as physical. It is a very complicated thing. And what we do is we construct our version of reality in our minds based on what we see. I'm going slightly lighter towards the bottom here. Lighter than that, I think, even. But I need to be really careful not to guess too much, because I will very often be wrong if I do. I think that's probably about the right value. need a smaller brush for that bit. I'm going to make a mess. I know I'm going to have about the same value there on this other side where the neck of the pot is in shadow. So I can pretty much put that in. And we're actually, because this is a white object and because I haven't toned the painting surface, we're actually pretty close to the final value balance that we're going to end up with already there. So I think I was pretty much right with this value here, and that is about a value 3 to a 4. That looks pretty much the same. The way to be more sure about these things is to blur your eye. When I'm painting, I usually have one eye closed and the other one out of focus, which helps you to get closer to the value relationships that you can see. My background is obviously still too dark. I want to get that relationship right because it's this here, because it's responsible for showing really this edge of form and this edge where I painted across the edge and disappeared the edge, if you like. I don't know if disappeared is a verb, but you know what I mean. That will only really work if there's another clue somewhere for your eye that there is a form there. And that value there is obviously going to help you see it. Now we're getting closer. And it's maybe worth pointing out that when I'm painting something more finished, like this, all of this stuff around here is, obviously there's a lot of texture and there's a lot of different colours and different values going on in there, but I've been very careful to make sure when I painted this that the value was right. And I set up that painting the subject and the painting surface, very like I have this one set up now, because it was a white object. So I needed to have the light set up properly on my painting surface and on the subject to make sure that I could hit those light values. And then that meant that when I was doing the values of all the rest of the painting, especially the apple and the colours of the apple, that they would be in about the right relationship. To the jug. If I'd pushed the values of the apple too high, then the jug wouldn't have looked as if it was occupying a physical space there. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as convincing. So I'm going to lay in some of the kind of the in-between values, if you like, that I can see over here, like this bit here, there's a slightly, this whole section here is slightly darker than the lightest plane here, and this bit here, because it's turning away from the light, is slightly darker than all of this bit here. So I'm going to put all that in. I guess with stuff like this, I don't, because they're small areas, I tend not to measure them, but I'm going in with, because I have a carefully laid out value string anyway, it's really easy for me to pick up a value which is, actually I'm going to go in with something around an 8. Is it about the right amount below my highest, lightest light? May end up slightly lower value than the actual pot, because what I'm thinking about while I'm working up towards the lights is what I was saying before. I was saying there were two things really that I would be considering when I'm painting something like this. One of them is the preparation, is making sure that I've set everything up correctly so that I know that I can hit the lights. The other is allowing a little bit of headroom in my lightest lights, allowing a little bit of space in order to put those little highlights in. And this is one of those things, I mean, it's a compromise. You know, it's something that you can't actually paint accurately, those little catch lights, highlights, whatever you want to call them, the reflected light coming straight at you. You can't paint them accurately because it's effectively light reflected into your eyes. We can't do that in paint. But we can try to suggest the relationship, and generally speaking, it does work. I'll show you in a second when I get onto the light plane. May not actually get through this one today, but as long as I get to the point where I've got enough done to demonstrate what I'm talking about, then we should be okay. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with the chat at the moment because I just want to get these bit of painting done here. And if you want to practice painting curved surfaces like this, I'm not doing a particularly great job at this one here, but the best thing that you can do is, I've posted them a few times on the blog, and anyone here who's on the colour course as well knows that I'm a big advocate of sphere studies. They teach you how to model form, how to model curves convincingly, like nothing else does. And if you can paint convincing spheres, you can, if you take the time to do it well, you can paint something like this convincingly too. Making a bit of a hash of the drawing here, but I always do that on these webinars because I'm too busy talking. But I think we've got enough in there for me to move on to the light plane. And my light plane here, this value that I have here, but it's a little bit dirty, but it's already pretty close to this one over here. I'll get a fresh clean brush for that. And instead of going in, I'll just show you what titanium white would look like there. That's the lightest value that I can hit there. I mean, because of the way that I can see the difference, it's slightly lighter than the painting surface. You probably can't see it on the camera, maybe you can. And if all I was bothered about, if this was a matte object here, then I would just go in with my lightest light, with my white, and I know that that would be about right. But I'm not going to. Now titanium white, remember I was saying earlier on, it's about a 9.5, depending on the titanium white you're using, sometimes slightly lighter. So I'm going to go in with the value 9 here, which is slightly darker. I may need to drop it a bit further from here as well. Just a little bit below. It's not going to throw the relationship out too much. You have some leeway with value relationships, as long as you make sure that you don't disturb them too much. The biggest problem in most people's paintings, if they're painting stuff and it's not looking convincing, the problem is usually the value. So I'm not quite on the lightest light that I can reach there. I've got a little bit of headroom. What I refer to it as headroom. Oops. I just mean I've got a little bit spare left in my lights. I can go slightly lighter, which means that I'll just bang these values in over here quickly. So I've got something there. Again, I'm putting 9 in here. If I wanted to get perceptually really close to that value, I would be putting in my titanium white. But I'm saving my lightest light. I find generally, as long as you make sure that you're pretty close and you don't get anything majorly out in these relationships, that you can drop the value a little bit on the light planes and still get away with it. So what I would do at this point, which is really, this study is mostly done, certainly enough for you to see the value relationships, is I'll show you how I do this actually. Let me find a good brush to do it with. This is my weapon of choice for putting those little highlights in. It looks a bit bushy and not very pointed at the end, but this is actually a Kolinsky sable. This is one of Rosemary's excellent brushes. It's a Kolinsky sable, and I'll get a little bit of clean medium on it first. I'm using Neo Megulp. It brings it to more of a point. Wipe it off. And I get a little, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's like it's a fairly big bit of thick titanium white on the end there, you know. And I'll look for where those points are in the painting, like there's one across the rim, and I'll kind of lay it down. And I don't mind that it's sticking really proud of the paint surface, because it will actually catch the light more that way, and it can actually help. There's a really fascinating portrait in the National Gallery, and I'm kicking myself as I say this because I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the painting, but it's by Van Dyck. And you know, they call it the plica luminaris. That little bit in the inside corner of your eye is actually built up to be an actual little ball, and the painting is lit from above, and the light bounces off it just like it bounces off this, and it's so convincing. It's so clever. With these I'll put them in, and I try to leave them pretty much alone, these little highlights. You're never going to get, I tend to leave them with a sharp edge if I can as well. You're never going to get anything that looks the same as what you have in reality, because this is reflected light and you can't do it. But you can kind of create the effect just by dropping the value a little bit. Okay, I can feel already that I'm starting to get into the stage of painting where I start to spend too much time on the details, and I want to make it look real and all the rest of it. But hopefully I've done enough there to show you how I would approach painting a white object, and it's mostly to do with making sure that you have all of your the light set up properly at the start to give yourself the best chance of hitting the value range that you can see. And that's especially important when you're painting light objects like this. If you don't have that right, painting stuff like this becomes almost impossible. Now notice here on the subject there is a slight line there where the form turns right away from the light. I won't paint that, I'll paint straight across it, because if this was a proper still life and there were quite a few subjects in this, it's just, I mean, that's a personal thing. I'm not saying you should do it, but I think there's something happens when you see that in a painting, and it's almost like it involves your mind in the creation of that version of reality that you're building on the surface. And I just feel it's a very effective way. To paint. Right, so I'm going to leave that one there. Now, I've done actually very little painting there, really. I've done almost no detail at all. I've done very little blending. All I've really done is put in the main values, and you can see that the lightest light that I have, the light plane over here that I have, is darker than the one that I have over here. I haven't got quite as light. With this painting, what I could do is get yet more light on my painting surface here that all of these values would then change and I would need to paint them darker, obviously. But that's because I've got this background here. If I had a black background there, then I couldn't do it without throwing out the relationship of at the back here. But what I would encourage you to do, let me change over to the other camera now. There we go. What I would encourage you to do is to try this stuff. What you need is what I've got here, which is not a huge amount of stuff really. There's the drawing board on the easel. This is just a Winsor & Newton canvas pad. There's the shadow box. I've got, I think, a post on my blog somewhere about how to build those. I can always put a link to the video in the replay email that I'll send you out. And then actually at the moment my shadow box is standing on 2 speakers because we're in the middle of preparing to move house, hopefully out to the countryside, where I'm going to get to paint a lot more nature subjects and also have a dedicated room for painting and not have to use the living room when the kids are in bed. So mine's you just need to get it up to a good height to paint. I was standing most of the time when I was painting then. And these 2 lights, I'll also, like I usually do, I'll send out a link to the lights that I use. I use slightly different bulbs, but basically these shadow boxes are fantastic. And this whole setup, you get another light with it as well, was about £100, about $150. It's not going to break the bank, you know. Get yourself a setup like this and try some stuff, you know. Don't take other people's word for how you should approach painting. Try it with another light over here shining onto your painting surface. Experiment with moving it forwards and backwards. These are just these are the easiest things in the world to make, these little colour checkers, and they can save you so much frustration. So really I'd just like to encourage you. I mean, obviously if you're on the colour course, then, and I know that some of you in the chat are, then you're doing this anyway, right? You're already doing this stuff. But whether you're on the course or not, have a go at this stuff because it teaches you a huge amount about value, and it will stand you in good stead no matter what you're painting. But if you come to paint something like this, a white object, hopefully I've been able to demonstrate to you that the reason that you find these problems, that they're so difficult, is because the local is right up the top of your value range, and unless you set up your painting surface so that you can get a one-to-one comparison with as near as you can with the lightest lights, barring direct reflected light, then you're going to struggle, because what you'll tend to do is you'll paint values like, say, the shadow side of that little white pot. You'll paint that right. You know, you might judge that pretty much correctly. But if you have insufficient light on your painting surface, when you put your white down, it's not going to look light enough and the relationship is going to be wrong and the thing isn't going to look real. It's basically a value balance problem, and it can be sorted out by making sure that you have the light balanced across your subject and your painting surface. And hopefully I've demonstrated how to do that. If I wanted to, because I have these 2 separate lights, there's 2 things I can do really to change things. I can move this light further away from the subject, which will drop the light in the shadow box, and therefore will drop the values. It will drop the highest values. Or I can move this light that I have over here shining on my painting surface forwards or backwards. Or actually I can turn on another bulb and make it lighter if I wanted to do that too. So in a sense, with artificial light it's easier because you have so much flexibility that you don't have under natural light. The big advantage with natural light is that it's a much more general light. It doesn't drop off quickly as artificial light does as it moves away from the source. So if you angle your painting surface more towards the light, you will tend to generally get the same amount of light on your painting surface as you have on the subject. But I'll tell you an interesting thing I noticed recently about, I need to look into this more to see if it's true, but I spent a lot of time looking at flower paintings, you know, for obvious reasons. And I was looking at Fantin Latour's flower paintings. Oh, God, they're gorgeous. And I noticed something, that on a lot of the lighter ones, if you look where the cast shadow is falling, I mean on light flowers, like if they were white flowers, quite often the cast shadow is at a very steep angle away from the viewer, which suggests to me that he would tend to set those subjects up, and his easel, so that he had the maximum amount of light on his painting surface. I think he may well have been doing something very similar to this, particularly on the very light flowers. The cast shadow tends to be not diametrically away from you, but at a fairly steep angle. And he will have been painting by natural light, of course, and I assume anyway. And I have a feeling that he set up, when he had flowers with a very light local, he would set them up so that he had the maximum amount of light falling on his painting surface, which meant angling it towards the light, which therefore would mean he was looking almost straight on at his subject with the light behind him, and the cast shadow would be, at a steeper angle away from you. Interesting thing. You can have a look around on Google and see if you think that it bears it out. It's something that I noticed the other day, and I thought I must look into that some more. Anyway, I'm going to have a quick look at the chat now, and I'm going to quickly scroll back, and I'll go through some of the questions here and see what we've got to answer. Please, could you mention that artist again? Fantin Latour, Fantin Latour. Godlike flower painter. Really, really amazing. I mean, there's been some really brilliant flower painters, but Fantin Latour is, for me, is pretty much like the gold standard for realistic flower painting. Beautiful work. I'm interested in where to get the lighting set up. Right, yeah, the lighting setup. You're on. Presumably, you're registered for the webinar. So when I send out the email, I send out a link to that. A word of warning about it: the bulbs I use are different than the ones that come with it. The ones that come with it are CRI 80 or something. Colour rendering index is pretty low, and they're also very weak. The bulbs that I've got in there, I can't recommend that you use them because they're much bigger than the ones that came with the lights. For all I know, it might be dangerous. So, I'd go so far as to say don't do it. But they're the ones I use, so I'll tell you what I use. And they're brilliant for painting. The only other thing I would say to them is the build quality of the stands isn't particularly good. I've had them probably for 2 or 3 years and they're still in one piece. You can forget trying to travel around with them very much, but because I work in the living room, I have to set them up every time I paint and then take them down, and they're starting to show. They're getting a bit wobbly, but they're cheap as chips, so you can always get another set if they fall apart, and I think they're pretty good. What I like about them more than anything else is the big old soft boxes that come with them, the diffusers. If you have just direct light without any diffuser on your subject, you get very harsh, hard cast shadows, and it may be aesthetically that's something you want, but for me, I'm trying to get as close as I can to the impression of natural daylight, so I like the big soft boxes and the nicely diffused light. Let's have a quick look. Another question about the lights. Yeah, that will be covered. Yeah, someone says you're the master with brush in hand. I've got to tell you, I'm really not. Okay, there are people who can use a brush like some kind of precision implement, and like a surgeon or something, and I'm really not one of those. I don't draw well with the brush at all, and what I tend to get right is the values and the colour, and all kinds of mistakes tend to be covered up if you can get the values and the colour right, I find. Someone's saying here, yes, mine came out with a white object looking grey, but my light setup was completely wrong. I would almost guarantee you, if you paint something and it looks grey, it's because you didn't have enough light on your painting surface and so you painted some of the values that you saw. You probably got some of them right, but you didn't have enough headroom in your lights to reach the lightest lights that you needed to get to. Almost guaranteed you didn't have enough light on your painting surface in relation to your subject. Do that bit of testing first. Make one of these. Is save your life so many times with values. Slide it across, hold it at the same angle as your painting surface, and check the lightest light that you can see there. If you can hit the lightest light with white paint, you'll probably be all right. Now here's an interesting one from Jim 5000. Interestingly, I was doing that and found that my paintings were too dark. I likely just overshot. Now that's interesting because if you have a subject in which there are quite a lot of darks and only a few lights, you will end up with, and you use this method, you basically, I call this, to myself, I call it painting to the lights. I'm going to do another webinar on value compression and how you can manipulate the value balance in order to create different aesthetic results. You do have a lot of flexibility in how you play with those things. I mean, there's nothing you can do about where your white is. Your white is always the lightest white you can get, titanium white. Your dark is always the darkest you can get. But say you got one of these, right? And say your mid values in your painting, in your subject, are around the middle. You can shift this middle. And if you shift this middle up, you get Impressionism. And if you shift it down, you get Rembrandt. I'm going to do a webinar on that and show you how to do it. I'm going to paint something like this twice. With two different value schemes, if you like, and I think a lot of painters that paint in these particular styles, they've internalized these value schemes, and they tend to do, because they don't do this kind of checking, they tend to impose them on their subjects, which is fine, you know, good even. But it's an interesting thing about Impressionism is that I don't believe Impressionism is about the colour. I think it's mostly about the value balance. If you look at some of Monet's earlier work, it's clearly impressionistic. You would call it Impressionism, but there's none of those blue shadows. There's no bright singing purples or anything like that. The colours tend to be generally fairly low chroma. And there are also he goes to his darkest darks and he goes to his lightest lights. So it's not about the range, and it's not about what people call the key. It's about the value scheme. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject, but I think that's a really fascinating subject, something that I need to practice more myself. And actually, funny enough, I'm about to start making some investigations in that area, and I'll do a webinar on that one soon. But anyway, sorry, to go back to your point, Jim, yes, if you do this, sometimes you will find that your painting overall, it'll look like an old master painting, like a Rembrandt or something, in terms of the value scheme, because you will have overall a darker painting with some areas of light. Jim also says, would it work to deliberately make all the values in the painting one step lower than the subject? So 8 becomes a set. I would say no, because you're going to break the relationships. If you just take every value and make it lower, the problem is, it's not so bad with a subject like this. You would just be making a darker painting, which was what you were saying before. I've gone down to a value 2 there, but if I had my black background in there and I've gone down as dark as I could possibly go, I'd be shifting everything down in relation to my darkest darks, and it's the relationships that matter. Now, this is an absolute comparison that I'm doing here, but I'm doing it in order to get the relationships more right. And if you practice with this stuff and you paint value relationships right, and this is a way to show you to get round the problems of perception and paint them right, you will start to internalize a good value balance, and that will come out in your painting with time. It takes practice like anything, but this is a way to practice it, you know. Someone said here, I need to watch some of his other videos to see how he checks value as he's mixing. I do actually have one. Have a look at my YouTube channel. Look me up, Paul Foxton, on YouTube. And there's one on there about painting values. It's one I did a little while ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, something like that. I forget what it's called now, but it's all about values and how I check values. And I think I went into some detail there and how I do it. But basically, I do a careful setup like this, and then I use my colour checker, and I use, all of these value chips to make sure that I'm hitting the values right. To be honest, I find that these days I do an abbreviated version of that, but for years I did it meticulously. I mean, really meticulously, and it taught me so much. That I now have internalized value schemes, I guess it really is a way to describe it for paintings. So I tend to be more right than I'm wrong, even if I just go by eye now. But it is very difficult because there are a lot of influences on our perception, and it is very difficult to get those things right. It does take a lot of practice. But there is a video out there with it. I think I'm probably going to do some more value videos soon anyway, so it will be coming. What brush are you using? Looks like Rosemary and Co. Well spotted, it is. That's what I mostly use. I use these ones, which I love to bits, Kolinsky Sables, rounds, and I use these are Mongoose, rightly discontinued, I believe, because there's some cruelty involved in the making of them, from what I've heard. I don't know how much of that is true, but I won't be buying any more of them. You know, you can paint with just about anything, can't you, really? So it's not justified. I don't know if there is any cruelty involved, but it's the rumour of it is enough to put me off. I've got those ones and I love them to bits. They're brilliant brushes, so I will paint with them, but I won't be buying any more. Light bulbs, yes, that will be covered. All right, I think that's all the questions. Unfortunately, I'm scrolled up the chat, so let me scroll back to the bottom again and just catch up with all your comments. Please send an email. I will. The thing about these webinars is I will send an email with a link tomorrow. I use YouTube live events, they're called, to record these. So they all end up on my YouTube channel as videos. So you can always catch all of them there. Do you ever put yellow or blue or raw umber into your whites? Well, it depends what the colour is I'm painting. Like this obviously is old, you know, and it's a very low chroma. The local is a very low chroma, very light yellow. And I can tell you what colours I used to mix that. I used white, titanium white, cadmium yellow, and burnt umber. So I mixed one colour on the yellow side, burnt umber and sap green. So I mixed one colour on the yellow side of it in terms of hue, and another colour on the green side in terms of hue. Got them both to the right value. This is called bracketing, and then mixed between them until I absolutely nailed the hue. Well, you can tell me if you think I nailed the hue or not. I think I got pretty close, right? I don't know if you can see that well. I've got if you look up bracketing, look up colour mixing and bracketing on Google, and I do believe there's a blog post that I wrote a little while ago will come up, show you how to do that. So I don't mix based on any ideas of what someone says you should use, colour recipes or anything like that. I mix based on what I see. How do you keep your own head from casting a shadow on the canvas? It's the position of the lights. I have them to the side, so that, and also so they don't reflect. So they are shining on the canvas. I'd say this light over here is at about 25 degrees. It's almost sideways on, and this one over here is probably about 30 degrees, shining down on the subject to give me form light. So as long as you have them kind of back like that, as long as you don't have them, if they're behind your head, you'll just get loads of reflection. It'll make it incredibly hard to paint. Okay, I think I've covered all the questions. If you have any more, if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions, just pop them in the comments. I'm usually pretty good with keeping up with those. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, and you'll see any other videos that come out. I'll be sending out the link to the replay tomorrow. Email me with any questions you have about any of this. Let me know if anything wasn't clear. Let me know what was clear, and I would love to hear if it made a difference to you and if it helped you. Thanks very much for coming along, and I'll see you at the next webinar in about a month's time. Thanks very much.